The year is 1958. Ford Motor Company wants to make a better big block design for its Mercury, edsel, and Lincoln lines. That's what MEL or MEL stands for. For those unfamiliar with edsel, edsel was a brand under the Ford Motor Company. Ford wanted 5 brands to compete with both General Motors and Chrysler. I know Ford only usually has 3 brands, Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln. In 1956, Continental became its own brand, but that only lasted 2 years, 56 and 57. Edsel came in 1958. Continental went back with Lincoln in that same year. Edsel only lasted 3 years, 58, 59, and 60. MEL engine family was produced from 1958 to 1967. 4 engine displacements. You had the 383, 410, 430, 462. The MEL, not to get confused with the MEG, was used in large cars produced in Lima, Ohio. All MEL engines used a wedge-shaped combustion chamber that formed between flat head surface and an angle milled into the block deck 10 degrees off square with the bore axis. This design is very similar to the W Series big block Chevy motors, the 348, 409, 427. Unlike the Chevy design, the MEL engines didn't have sculpted valve covers or staggered valves. The MEL engine used valves that were in line with shaft-mounted rocker arms. So, fun trivia. The MEL engine was one of 3 engine families Ford introduced in 1958. The other 2 was the FE, Ford Edsel, which replaced the Y-block design, and then you also had the SD for Super Duty. So let's start with the 383, which was the smallest engine displacement from this engine family. It was only used in Mercury vehicles. 383 cubic inch displacement, V8 overhead valve, 6.3 liters. So this engine has it made different horsepower figures every single year. So in 1958, when it made its debut, this engine was produced from 1958 to 1960. In 1958, it could either make 312 to 330 horsepower. In 1959, power output was in the middle of those two numbers at 322 horsepower. In 1960, they detuned this engine and it only made 280 horsepower. And that all happened at 4,600 RPM, 405 pound-feet of torque at 2,900 RPM, with a bore of 4.3 inches and a stroke of 3.3 inches. Compression was 10.5 to 1. Up next, also introduced in 1958, and this was a one-year wonder kind of engine. It was only available for 1 year in one car series, edsel. It was offered in the senior series cars such as the Citation and Corsair. 410 cubic inch displacement overhead valve, V8, 6.7 liters. MEL engine, not to get confused because there was a 410 FE, which was a Mercury only engine. This is a super underrated engine. It was good for 345 horsepower, 4,600 RPM, 475 pound-feet of torque at 2,300 RPM with a bore of 4.2 inches and a stroke of 3.7 inches. Compression was 10.5 to 1. 5 main bearings, cast iron, fed with a 4-barrel carburetor. Also introduced in 1958, the absolute legend, which was the 430 cubic inch displacement V8. This was the standard engine for Lincoln Continental from 1958 to 1960. This engine was used from 1958 all the way out until 1965, and it goes by a lot of different names. It could be found in the Thunderbird as the 430 Special. 1958 Super Marauder, which made 400 horsepower. This engine, the power was different just about every single year. In 1958, it made 375 horsepower, the most horsepower it will ever make from the factory. 1958. 1959, power was detuned to 350 horsepower. 1960, 315 horsepower. 1961, 325 horsepower. By 1964, they settled with 340 horsepower. And all of that happened in or around 4,100 RPM, bore of 4.3 inches, and a stroke of 3.7 inches. Compression is all over the place. It could be 10 to 1 to 10.5 to 1. We can't go on without talking about the Super Marauder, super underrated, most powerful engine. Up until that point, the Mercury Marauder was born to compete with the Chrysler 300. For those that don't know, 300 in the Chrysler 300 title was for 300 horsepower, which this car was a direct competitor to. I should say that that's what this engine was made to do. The standard 58 Mercury 430 made 365 horsepower, 10 horsepower less than the Lincoln, which made 375 horsepower. To get 400 horsepower out of the 430, Mercury hired Bill Straup, who put an aluminum intake manifold and triple two-barrel carburetors, which were vacuum actuated. Straup wanted to do so much more to this engine, but Mercury wouldn't let him. He wanted a more aggressive cam, but after testing this engine, the 400 horsepower goal was reached, and Mercury just didn't see the need to complicate things and dump more money into this project. Just think, we could have had a more powerful version. The Super Marauder made 400 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, 500 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM, all with the standard camshaft. And I always thought that this just never got the press. Say like GM, they got press with everything they made. But come to find out that this wasn't a hit because Mercury didn't want it to be. They didn't advertise this engine, and when you were ordering this, it was so small and so easily overlooked in the advertising, or lack thereof. And these only came in big cars. The easiest way to tell the difference between a Super Marauder V8 and a lesser or standard 430 is the Super Marauder has this really cool, groovy looking aluminum air filter, which was designed by former Ford stylist Lynn Wineland. In 1966, the 430 was replaced by the 462 with a brand new bore and stroke, 462 cubic inch displacement, V8, 7.6 liters. This engine was used from 1966 to 1968. It produced 340 horsepower, 4,600 RPM, 488 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM, with a bore of 4.4 inches and a stroke of 3.8 inches. Compression is 10-25 to 1, built of cast iron, hydraulic lifters. This engine was only found in the Lincoln Continentals. The MEL would be replaced by the Ford 385 engine family in 1968. And they would produce the 385, which ironically isn't an engine displacement size, rather 3.85 inch crankshaft stroke of the 460 V8. Ford would produce the 385 from 1968 all the way up until 1998. All right, now it's time for Would You Rather. Two scenarios today. Money, no object. In the first scenario, would you rather have a 1958 Mercury Park Lane or a 1958 Edsel Citation or 1958 Lincoln Continental? I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Bit of clarification, the 1958 Mercury Marauder doesn't have the Super Marauder engine in it. All right, I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Moving to the second scenario. If the first one wasn't hard, this one will be. 1959 Ford Thunderbird 430 Special or 1963 Lincoln Continental or 1958 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to get both the name of the band and the song title correctly in the comment section. That's the key word. I can't post your comment from the live chat. I wish that I could, but it doesn't work like that. First person to give the comment correctly in the comment section will have their comment pinned to the top of it. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. If you'd like to get in touch with me, shoot me a comment in the comment section below. I run this channel like a community and I'm part of it. I read and answer all comments posted. We have a Facebook group that correlates with this YouTube channel. I call it the After Party. It's a place where you can share your rides, stories, experiences, and we can actually see pictures of it. I wish YouTube had something like that, like a community bulletin board. It would be really cool. YouTube, if you're listening, that would be cool. Oh yeah, and if you owned a car with any of these engines in it, what was your experience? Did you have a good experience? Did you have a bad experience? What to watch out for? The comments help just about as much as the content itself. Because like I said, this is a community, not a channel. Just know I appreciate all of the support, and until next time, toodaloo!